The chains around Ilara's wrists cut into her skin as the guard shoved her forward onto the wooden platform. Bright lights burned her eyes. Hundreds of faces stared up at her from the dark crowd below, and every single one of them looked at her like she was nothing more than an object to be bought. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. This could not be real. Just 3 days ago she had been walking home from her job at the flower shop, humming a song under her breath, completely unaware that her whole world was about to be ripped apart. Now she stood barefoot on cold wood, wearing a thin white dress that had been forced onto her by rough hands, waiting to be sold like cattle to the highest bidder. Lot number 47, the announcer's voice boomed across the hall. He was a thin man with slick back hair and a smile that made her skin crawl. A rare, unregistered Omega. Look at her closely, gentlemen. Do you smell that? Pure, untouched. Every alpha in this room knows how rare that scent truly is. Ilara wanted to scream. She wanted to run, but the guards on either side of her held her arms so tightly that any movement was pointless. She had already tried to escape twice since she was taken. Both times, she had failed. Both times, she had paid for it with pain she still felt in her bones. She lifted her chin instead, refusing to let them see her cry. If these monsters wanted to buy her, fine, but she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. The bidding started low. A rough voice from somewhere in the crowd called out a number, then another, then another. Ilara felt sick as the numbers climbed higher and higher, each one another reminder that she was nothing to these people but a prize to be won. She scanned the crowd, trying to see who was bidding on her, trying to guess which face belonged to the monster who would soon own her life. Then, suddenly, the room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the back of the hall. Even the announcer froze, his mouth slightly open, his confident smile replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. Ilara followed their eyes. A tall figure stood in the doorway, wrapped in a long black coat that seemed to swallow the light around him. He did not rush. He did not hurry. He walked forward slowly, each step echoing through the silent hall like a war drum. The crowd parted for him without being asked, the way water parts for a blade cutting through it. She had heard whispers about him during her 3 days in captivity. The other captured Omegas spoke his name only in frightened whispers, as if saying it too loudly might summon him. Kale Draven, the Alpha King, a man so feared that entire packs had reportedly disappeared after crossing him, a man whose enemies were never seen again, a man some called a monster wearing the shape of a human being. And now he was walking straight toward the platform where she stood. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. Up close, he was even more terrifying than the stories suggested. His eyes were a deep, unnatural shade of gold, sharp and calculating, like a predator sizing up its next meal. A jagged scar ran down one side of his jaw, a permanent reminder of some battle long past. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of quiet confidence that only came from a man who had never once lost a fight in his life. He stopped directly in front of the platform and looked up at her. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. His gaze moved slowly over her face, and Ilara forced herself not to look away, even though every instinct screamed at her to hide. She would not cower, not now, not ever. 1 million, Kale said. His voice was low, calm, and utterly final. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The announcer's mouth fell open completely. No one had ever heard a bid that high in the history of the auction house. Ilara's stomach dropped. 1 million. For her, as if she were nothing but a piece of art or a rare gemstone. Going once, the announcer stammered, clearly too afraid to ask for a higher bid from anyone else in the room. Nobody dared raise their hand against the Alpha King anyway. Going twice, his voice cracked. Sold, to the Alpha King. The crowd erupted into hushed murmurs, but Ilara barely heard any of it. Her eyes were locked on the man below her, the man who had just bought her life, with less effort than most people spent buying groceries. She braced herself for him to smile, to gloat, to show some sign of cruel satisfaction at his purchase. He did none of those things. Instead, his expression remained unreadable, almost distant, as if the whole event meant nothing to him at all. He simply turned to one of the guards standing near the platform and said 2 words. Release her. The guard hesitated only a second before unlocking the chains around her wrists. The moment they fell away, Elara rubbed at the raw marks left behind, glaring down at the man who now, according to this horrifying system, owned her. "I'm not an animal," she said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear. "You can't just buy a person like I'm some kind of object." A flicker of something crossed his golden eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or amusement. It was gone before she could be certain. "Get down here," he said simply, ignoring her outburst entirely. Elara clenched her jaw, weighing her options. She could refuse. She could make a scene, but looking around the room full of dangerous alphas who had just watched her get bought like livestock, she realized there was truly nowhere safe to run. At least standing near Kale, terrifying as he was, meant the other bidders in the room could no longer touch her. She stepped down from the platform on unsteady legs. Up close, he was even more overwhelming, his presence pressing down on her like a physical weight. She had to tilt her head back just to meet his eyes. "You're afraid," he said quietly, studying her face. "Wouldn't you be?" she shot back, before she could stop herself. Something shifted in his expression again, quick and unreadable, before his face returned to its usual stone-like calm. "Walk with me," he said, and turned without waiting for her answer, clearly expecting her to follow. Elara hesitated only a moment before falling into step beside him, flanked closely by two of his guards. As they made their way out of the auction hall, she caught snippets of frightened whispers from the crowd they passed. "That's the Alpha King who wiped out the Ashfell pack in a single night. They say he doesn't need a weapon. His bare hands are enough. I heard no one who crosses him lives to tell the tale." Each whisper sent a new wave of dread crawling up her spine. She glanced sideways at Kale, trying to imagine the calm, quiet man walking beside her, committing the kind of violence people were describing. It didn't seem possible, and yet, judging by the way even the guards around them kept a respectful, fearful distance, it clearly was. Outside the auction house, a sleek black vehicle waited at the curb, its engine already running. Kale opened the door himself, an oddly polite gesture from a man rumored to be capable of such brutality, and gestured for her to get inside. Elara paused at the door, searching his face for any hint of what was about to happen to her. "Where are you taking me?" "Home," he said simply. "Your home," she corrected bitterly, "not mine." His jaw tightened slightly, the first real crack she had seen in his composed mask. "For now," he said, "yes, mine." She wanted to argue further, but the exhaustion of the past 3 days was catching up with her fast, and she knew fighting him here, surrounded by his guards, would accomplish nothing. Reluctantly, she climbed into the car. Kale slid in beside her, and the door shut with a heavy, final click that made her chest tighten with dread. The car pulled away from the auction house, leaving behind the building where her old life had officially ended. Elara stared out the window as the city lights blurred past, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to ask out loud. Why had he paid such an absurd amount for her? What did he actually want from her? Was she about to become another victim added to the long list of names people whispered about in fear? She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. He sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable once again. There was something strange about the way he held himself, tense in a way that didn't quite match the terrifying reputation surrounding him. It was almost as if he was carrying some invisible weight on his shoulders, one heavier than she could understand. "You haven't asked me anything," she said quietly, breaking the silence. He turned his head slightly toward her. "What would you like me to ask?" "My name, for one," she said. "Or does it not matter to men like you?" For the first time since she had seen him, something that almost resembled a smile touched the corner of his mouth. It vanished, as quickly as it appeared. "Elara," he said. She blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "I make it a point to know everything about the things I acquire," he said, and though his tone was calm, there was an edge underneath it that made her stomach twist. "I'm not a thing," she said firmly. He studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her want to look away, and refuse to look away at the same time. "No," he finally said, so quietly she almost missed it. "Perhaps not." The car continued through the city, eventually leaving the bright lights behind, and entering a stretch of dark, winding roads that led toward the mountains in the distance. Ilara watched as an enormous stone structure came into view, its towers rising high above the tree line, its windows glowing with dim golden light against the night sky. It looked less like a house and more like a fortress built to keep the world out, or perhaps to keep something dangerous locked inside. "That's where you live?" she asked, unable to hide the awe in her voice despite her fear. "That's where you live now too," Kale said. The words hit her like a physical blow. This was really happening. She had been sold, bought, and was now being taken to live inside the home of a man the entire world seemed to fear. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling very small and very alone. As if sensing her fear, Kale spoke again, his voice softer than before. "No one inside these walls will hurt you," he said. "You have my word on that." "Your word," she repeated, unable to keep the disbelief from her tone. "The word of a man they call Bloodthirsty." His hands tightened briefly on his knees, the only sign that her words had actually affected him. "There is a difference," he said slowly, "between what people believe about a man and what that man actually is." Ilara didn't respond. She wasn't sure she believed him, not yet, not after everything she had witnessed and heard in the past few hours. But something about the way he said it, quiet and almost tired, made her wonder, just for a moment, if there was more to the terrifying Alpha King than the rumors suggested. The car finally came to a stop in front of the massive stone entrance. Guards immediately stepped forward to open the doors, but Kale held up a hand, silently telling them to wait. He turned to Ilara instead. "Whatever you've heard about me," he said, his golden eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs, "you're about to find out the truth for yourself." Ilara swallowed hard, her heart pounding as she stared up at the fortress looming above them, its shadow swallowing the both of them whole. Whatever was waiting for her behind those enormous doors, she had a feeling her life would never be the same again. She took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and stepped out of the car and into the unknown. The inside of the fortress was nothing like Ilara had imagined. She had expected cold stone walls, dark corridors, maybe even the distant sound of screaming somewhere far below. Instead, she found herself standing in a massive entrance hall, lit by warm golden light, with polished floors that reflected the glow of tall candles lining the walls. It looked more like the home of royalty than the lair of a monster. A young woman with kind eyes and a nervous smile approached them the moment they stepped inside. She wore simple dark clothing and carried herself with the careful posture of someone used to being watchful. "This is Grace," Kale said. "She'll show you to your room and get you anything you need." "My room," Ilara repeated slowly. "Not a cell?" Something flickered across Kale's face, gone before she could name it. "This is not that kind of house," he said, his voice low. Grace stepped forward and gently touched Ilara's arm, guiding her toward a wide staircase. "Come with me," she said softly. "You must be exhausted." Ilara glanced back at Kale one last time before following Grace up the stairs. He remained standing at the bottom, watching her go, his expression unreadable in the flickering candlelight. She couldn't shake the feeling that his golden eyes were burning holes into her back long after she disappeared around the corner. The room Grace led her to was nothing short of stunning. Tall windows overlooked a moonlit forest, stretching endlessly into the darkness. A large, soft bed sat against one wall, piled high with blankets and pillows. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, filling the room with warmth. It was beautiful, too beautiful. It felt wrong, somehow, to be given such comfort right after being sold like property. "I don't understand," Ilara said, turning to Grace. "Why does this feel like a guest room instead of a prison?" Grace hesitated, glancing toward the door as if checking to make sure they were truly alone. "The king is different than what people say," she said carefully. "You'll see." "Different how?" Ilara pressed. But Grace only offered a small, tired smile. "That's not my story to tell," she said gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will make more sense, I promise." Before Ilara could ask anything else, Grace quietly slipped out of the room, leaving her alone with her racing thoughts. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, running her fingers over the soft blankets, feeling completely disconnected from the life she used to know. Just days ago she had been arguing with a customer over the price of roses. Now she was sitting inside a fortress, owned by a man the entire world seemed to fear. waiting to find out what her new life was going to look like. She didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the old building sent her heart racing. Every distant sound made her imagine footsteps approaching her door. But no one came. No one bothered her at all. By the time the first light of morning crept through the tall windows, exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. When she woke, sunlight filled the room, and for a brief, peaceful moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories came flooding back, and her chest tightened all over again. A soft knock sounded at the door, before Grace peeked her head inside. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "The king requested you join him for breakfast, if you're feeling up to it." Ilara's stomach twisted with nerves, but she nodded anyway, unwilling to hide in her room forever. Grace helped her into simple, comfortable clothing, far from the humiliating dress she had worn at the auction, and led her downstairs to a bright dining room, where morning light spilled across a long wooden table. Cale sat at the far end, a cup of dark coffee in front of him, his golden eyes lifting the moment she entered the room. He looked different in the daylight, less like the terrifying figure from the auction hall, and more like an ordinary man carrying an extraordinary weight on his shoulders. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair nearest him, rather than the one furthest away, which surprised her more than she wanted to admit. She sat down carefully, watching him from the corner of her eye, as a servant placed a plate of food in front of her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched uncomfortably, until Ilara finally couldn't take it anymore. "Why did you buy me?" she asked bluntly. Cale's cup paused halfway to his lips. He set it down slowly, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That's a complicated answer," he said. "I have time," she said, crossing her arms. A ghost of something that might have been amusement crossed his features. "You're braver than most people who sit at this table," he said. "I'm not brave," she said honestly. "I'm just tired of being afraid of things I don't understand." His golden eyes studied her for a long moment, something unreadable swirling behind them. "Then let me start with this," he said finally. "You are not a prisoner here. You are not a servant, and despite what happened at that auction, I have no intention of treating you the way those animals who ran it would have." "Then what do you intend?" she asked carefully. Cale's jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw something flicker behind his calm mask, something that looked almost like pain. "That," he said quietly, "is a conversation for another day." Before she could push further, one of his guards entered the room, whispering something urgent into his ear. Cale's entire posture shifted in an instant, the calm, careful man disappearing, replaced by someone sharp, alert, and undeniably dangerous. "Stay here," he said to Ilara, his voice suddenly cold and commanding. "Do not leave this room until Grace comes for you." Before she could ask what was wrong, he was already gone, moving through the halls with the same terrifying purpose she had seen at the auction house. Ilara sat frozen at the table, her heart pounding, painfully aware that whatever calm, mysterious version of the Alpha King she had just met was only one small piece of who he truly was. And somewhere deep down, she knew she had just caught her first real glimpse of the monster everyone else feared. 3 days passed before Ilara saw Cale again, outside of brief, distant glances across the fortress halls. Grace explained only that there had been trouble near the northern border, something involving a rival pack testing the edges of Cale's territory. Nothing more was said, though the tension in the fortress was impossible to ignore. Guards moved with quiet urgency. Servants spoke in hushed voices. Even the air itself seemed to hum with unspoken danger. Ilara used the time to explore the fortress as much as she was allowed, cautiously mapping the long stone hallways, the quiet library filled with ancient books, and the wide balconies overlooking the endless forest below. She was surprised to find that no one stopped her. No one questioned her wandering. If anything, the staff seemed to go out of their way to make her feel comfortable, offering warm meals, soft blankets, and gentle conversation whenever she seemed troubled. It didn't make sense. Everything she had heard about Cale painted him as a merciless, bloodthirsty tyrant, but nothing about his home, or the way his people treated her, matched that description at all. One afternoon, while wandering through a quiet hallway lined with old paintings, Ilara paused in front of a large portrait, depicting a woman with soft brown eyes and a gentle smile, standing beside a much younger version of Cale. The boy in the painting looked nothing like the hardened man she had met. He looked happy, innocent even. That was his mother, a voice said from behind her. Alara turned to find an older man standing nearby, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture stiff and formal. He introduced himself as Edward, one of the fortress's longtime advisors. "She looks kind," Alara said softly, studying the painting. "She was," Edward said, his voice tinged with old sadness. "The kindest woman I ever knew." "What happened to her?" Edward hesitated, glancing around as if debating whether to answer. "She passed away when the king was still very young," he finally said. "It's not really my place to say more than that." Alara studied the painting a while longer after Edward excused himself, unable to shake the feeling that there was an entire hidden story behind Cale's cold, guarded exterior, one that no one in this fortress seemed willing to fully explain. That evening, she finally saw Cale again. He looked exhausted, dark circles shadowing his golden eyes, his usually composed posture slightly slouched from what she assumed had been days without proper rest. She found him standing alone on one of the fortress balconies, staring silently out at the darkened forest. "You look terrible," she said, before she could stop herself. A tired huff of laughter escaped him, the sound surprising them both. "That might be the first honest thing anyone said to me in days," he admitted. She walked closer, leaning against the stone railing beside him, close enough to feel the exhaustion radiating off him like heat. "Is everything all right?" she asked, and immediately felt strange for caring about the well-being of the man who had bought her like property just days earlier. "Define all right," he said quietly. "That bad?" He was silent for a long moment before answering. "There are people in this world," he said slowly, "who believe the only way to survive is to destroy anyone who might one day become a threat. I spend most of my time trying to stop them from destroying the people who trust me to protect them." "That doesn't sound very bloodthirsty," she said softly. His eyes flicked toward her, something raw and unguarded flashing behind them. "The world doesn't care about the truth," he said. "It only cares about the story that's easiest to believe." Alara studied his face, seeing past the sharp jaw and intimidating presence for the first time, seeing instead a man who seemed impossibly tired, impossibly alone. "Then tell me the truth," she said. "Why did you really buy me at that auction?" Cale's gaze locked onto hers, and for a long, tense moment, she thought he might finally answer. But instead, he straightened, the familiar guarded mask sliding back into place. "Not tonight," he said quietly. "Tonight, I just need one moment where the world isn't trying to kill me." Something about the raw honesty in his voice softened the anger she had been holding on to since the auction. She didn't push further. Instead, she simply stood beside him in comfortable silence, both of them staring out at the same dark forest, each carrying secrets neither was ready to share. For the first time since arriving at the fortress, Alara didn't feel afraid of the man beside her. She felt something far more complicated instead. Over the following days, a strange and unexpected trust began growing between Alara and Cale. It started with small things. Him remembering how she liked her tea after only being told once. Her noticing the way his shoulders relaxed slightly whenever she walked into a room. Neither of them spoke about it directly, but something between them was shifting, quietly and steadily, like the tide slowly pulling in. One morning, Alara found Cale in the training yard behind the fortress, practicing with a long wooden staff against one of his guards. She had never seen him move like that before, fast, precise, powerful in a way that made her chest tighten with something she refused to name. When the guard finally yielded, Cale turned and noticed her watching from the doorway. "Enjoying the show?" he asked, a rare hint of teasing in his voice. "You're fast," she said honestly. "Comes with practice," he said, setting the staff aside and walking toward her, slightly out of breath. "Do you know how to defend yourself?" "I know how to run," she said dryly. Something that almost looked like a real smile touched his lips. "That's not always an option," he said. "Come here." Alara hesitated only a moment before stepping into the training yard, curiosity overpowering her caution. For the next hour, Cale patiently showed her simple ways to protect herself, how to break free from a grip, how to use an opponent's size against them, instead of trying to match their strength. He was surprisingly gentle in his instruction, correcting her stance with careful hands, never once making her feel foolish for not knowing. "You're a good teacher," she admitted afterward, slightly breathless from the exercise. "You're a fast learner," he replied. They stood there a moment too long, close enough that she could see the golden flecks swirling inside his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool morning air. Ilara's heart pounded in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Kale," she said softly, using his name for the first time. "Why does everyone believe you're such a monster?" His expression shifted, the walls rising again, though not as quickly as before. "Because it's easier for my enemies to hate a monster," he said, "than to hate a man who's simply trying to protect the people he loves." "And who do you love?" she asked, before she could stop herself. The question hung heavily between them. Kale's gaze softened in a way she had never seen before, something vulnerable flickering behind his golden eyes. "I'm still figuring that out," he said quietly. Ilara felt her cheeks warm despite herself, unsure of what to say next. Before either of them could speak again, the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the moment. Grace appeared at the edge of the training yard, her expression tight with worry. "My king," she said breathlessly, "Edward needs you immediately. It's about the Northern Territory again." Kale's entire demeanor shifted instantly, the soft, open man disappearing behind the sharp, guarded king once more. "I have to go," he said to Ilara, though something in his eyes told her he wished he didn't have to. "Go," she said softly, "I'll be here." He paused, studying her for a moment longer than necessary, before finally turning and following Grace back toward the fortress. Ilara watched him go, her heart still racing from their conversation, unable to shake the feeling that whatever was happening between them was far more complicated and far more dangerous than she had originally believed. Whatever secrets Kale was hiding, she had a feeling she was about to become tangled up in all of them. That evening, unable to sleep, Ilara wandered down to the fortress library, drawn by the soft glow of candlelight spilling from beneath the door. Inside, she found Edward sitting at a large wooden desk, surrounded by stacks of old books and yellowed papers. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked without looking up. "Too many questions," she admitted, stepping further into the room. Edward gestured toward the chair across from him. "Ask away," he said. "I may not have all the answers, but I'll give you what I can." Ilara sat down slowly, choosing her words carefully. "What's happening in the Northern Territory?" she asked. "Everyone keeps whispering about it, but no one will explain." Edward's expression grew serious. He glanced toward the door before lowering his voice. "There's a rival kingdom," he said, "led by a man named Victor Ashwood. Generations ago, his ancestors placed a curse upon Kale's bloodline." "A curse?" Ilara repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "It's old magic," Edward continued. "Powerful, dark, and slowly killing every member of the royal bloodline before they reach old age. Kale's mother died from it, his father before her. It's the reason Kale pushes everyone away, the reason he trains so hard, the reason he carries himself the way he does. He's spent his entire life preparing for a fight he's not entirely sure he can win." Ilara's chest tightened with a strange mix of sympathy and dread. "Is there a cure?" she asked quietly. Edward hesitated, studying her carefully before answering. "The old texts speak of only one thing, capable of breaking a curse this powerful," he said slowly. "A true, fated bond between the cursed Alpha and a rare Omega whose scent matches his soul perfectly." The room went silent as the weight of his words settled over her. Ilara's mind raced back to the auction, to the way the announcer had spoken about her unusual scent, to the impossible amount of money Kale had paid without hesitation. "He didn't buy me because he wanted me," she said slowly, feeling something crack painfully inside her chest. "He bought me because he needs me to survive." Edward's expression softened with something like pity. "I believe," he said gently, "it may have started that way, but I've watched that boy grow into a man haunted by loneliness his entire life, and in the short time you've been here, I haven't seen him smile as much in years." Ilara sat frozen, processing the painful, complicated truth now settled heavily in her chest. She didn't know whether to feel angry, betrayed, or something far more tender and terrifying. Whatever Kale truly felt for her, one thing had become painfully clear. Her presence here was never simply about desire. It was about survival. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was tangled up in a battle far bigger than herself, one involving ancient curses, dangerous enemies, and a broken, guarded king, who was slowly, carefully, letting her see the man hidden beneath the monster everyone else feared. Ilara found Kale the next morning, standing alone in the fortress's private garden, staring blankly at a small stone fountain. She approached quietly, her earlier anger tempered now by the painful truth she had learned the night before. "You should have told me," she said softly. Kale turned, his expression guarded but tired. "Edward talks too much," he muttered. "He cares about you," she said. "That's not a crime." Kale sighed heavily, running a hand through his dark hair. "I was going to tell you," he said, "when the time felt right." "When would that have been?" she asked, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "After I fell for you without knowing the truth? After you got what you needed from me?" His jaw tightened, pain flashing behind his golden eyes. "It was never supposed to happen this way," he said quietly. "I bought you because your scent matched the description in the old texts. I told myself it was purely strategic, a necessary step to save my people from a curse that's already claimed everyone I've ever loved." "And now?" Ilara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, close enough to see every flicker of emotion crossing his usually unreadable face. "Now," he said softly, "I'm terrified that the curse isn't the only thing I can't survive losing." Her breath caught at the raw honesty in his words. Whatever careful walls he had built around his heart were crumbling right in front of her, and despite everything, despite the impossible circumstances that had brought them together, she found herself wanting to catch the pieces before they shattered completely. "I'm still angry," she admitted quietly. "You have every right to be," he said. "But I understand," she continued. "I understand what it's like to be forced into a life you never chose." Kale's eyes softened with something achingly vulnerable. "I never wanted to force you into anything," he said. "I want you to choose this. Choose me, not because of some ancient curse, but because you actually want to be here." Ilara studied his face for a long moment, weighing the impossible tangled feelings tightening in her chest. Fear, anger, sympathy, and something else entirely, something warm and terrifying that she hadn't expected to feel, for the man who had bought her like property just days before. "Give me time," she finally said. "Take all the time you need," Kale replied softly. "I've waited my entire life for something worth waiting for. A little longer won't kill me." For the first time since arriving at the fortress, Ilara allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Whatever complicated, dangerous path lay ahead of them, one thing had become undeniably clear. The monster everyone feared was nothing compared to the man slowly revealing himself beneath the mask. And despite every warning sign screaming at her to run, Ilara found herself wanting to stay and discover exactly who that man truly was. Peace, however fragile, never lasted long inside the walls of Kale's fortress. Only days after their conversation in the garden, the quiet was shattered by the sound of shouting echoing through the halls late one night. Ilara bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering as Grace burst through her door, panic clear on her face. "You need to come with me right now," Grace said urgently. "What's happening?" Ilara asked, already scrambling out of bed. "There's been an attack near the eastern wall," Grace said, pulling Ilara toward the hallway. "Someone got inside the grounds. The king is furious." Ilara's stomach dropped as they hurried down the stairs, the sound of urgent voices and heavy footsteps growing louder with every step. When they reached the main hall, she found Kale standing amid a group of guards, his expression darker and more dangerous than she had ever seen it. "Search every corner of this fortress," he commanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "If they got this close once, they'll try again." His golden eyes swept across the room and landed on Ilara, something fierce and protective flashing behind them. He crossed the distance between them in seconds, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with barely restrained panic. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "What happened?" "Someone from Ashwood's kingdom breached the eastern wall," he said grimly. "They didn't get far, but it's clear now that they know you're here." Fear pooled cold in Ilara's stomach. "They're after me?" Kale's expression darkened further. "They're after anything that could break the curse protecting my bloodline," he said. "Which means, yes, you're now a target." Before she could respond, one of the guards rushed forward, breathless. "My king," he said urgently. "We found something. You need to see this yourself." Cale's jaw tightened as he turned to Alara. "Stay close to Grace," he ordered. "Do not leave the main hall until I return." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but the fierce protectiveness burning behind his eyes told her arguing would accomplish nothing. She nodded instead, watching him disappear down the hallway with a group of armed guards trailing closely behind him. The following hour felt like the longest of her life. Alara paced the main hall anxiously, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities. She thought about the curse, about Victor Ashwood, about the terrifying idea that her presence here had put an entire fortress full of people in danger. When Cale finally returned, his expression was grim, a folded piece of parchment clutched tightly in his hand. "What is it?" Alara asked immediately. He hesitated only a moment before handing her the parchment. She unfolded it with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the harsh, threatening words scrawled across the page. It was a warning, a promise from Victor Ashwood that he would stop at nothing to ensure the curse remained unbroken, that he would tear apart everything Cale loved before allowing him to survive. "He knows about me," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. Cale's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "He won't touch you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will burn his entire kingdom to the ground before I let that happen." The raw intensity in his voice sent a chill down her spine, not from fear of him, but from the fierce, protective devotion radiating off every word. Whatever doubts she still carried about the terrifying reputation surrounding Cale Draven, watching him now, ready to destroy an entire kingdom to protect her safety, made one thing undeniably clear. She was no longer just a means to break an ancient curse. She had become something far more important to him than that. And as dangerous as that realization felt, standing amid the wreckage of an attempted attack, Alara found herself trusting him more than she had ever trusted anyone else in her entire life. The days following the attack transformed the fortress into something resembling a war camp. Guards doubled their patrols. New defensive measures were installed along every wall. Cale barely slept, spending most of his nights poring over maps and old texts with Edward, searching for any advantage against Victor Ashwood's forces. Alara insisted on helping in whatever way she could, refusing to sit idle while an entire fortress prepared for war on her behalf. She spent hours in the library alongside Edward, studying the old curse texts, searching for any detail that might help them understand exactly what they were up against. "Here," Edward said one evening, pointing to a faded passage in one of the ancient books. "This mentions the bonding ritual required to break the curse completely." Alara leaned closer, reading the passage carefully. According to the text, the bond needed to be more than simple proximity or attraction. It required a mutual, willing devotion between the cursed Alpha and his fated Omega, a bond strong enough to weather any storm thrown against it. "It has to be real," she murmured, more to herself than to Edward. "Is that a problem?" Edward asked gently. Alara hesitated, glancing toward the door where she could faintly hear Cale's voice down the hallway, discussing defensive strategies with his guards. "No," she admitted quietly. "I don't think it is." Later that night, she found Cale alone, on the same balcony where they had first truly connected, staring out at the darkened forest, with visible exhaustion weighing down his shoulders. She walked over silently and stood beside him, letting the comfortable quiet settle between them before speaking. "I read about the bonding ritual today," she said softly. Cale's entire body tensed beside her. And I think," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "that somewhere between the auction hall and tonight, this stopped being about breaking a curse for me." He turned to face her fully, golden eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. "What changed?" he asked quietly. "You did," she admitted. "The monster everyone warned me about isn't the man I've come to know these past few weeks." Cale's hand reached up hesitantly, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch far more tender than she ever imagined the terrifying Alpha King capable of. "I've spent my entire life being feared," he said softly. "I never expected to be understood." "I understand more than you think," Alara whispered. The distance between them shrank slowly, both of them acutely aware of the weight of the moment building between them. Just as their eyes locked in silent understanding, The sound of a distant horn shattered the fragile peace, echoing loudly across the fortress grounds. Kale's expression hardened instantly, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the fierce warrior once more. "That's the northern warning horn," he said grimly, already moving toward the door. "Ashwood's forces are here." Elara's heart pounded as she followed him inside, the fortress erupting into chaotic, urgent movement around them. Whatever tender moment had been building between them would have to wait. War had finally arrived at their doorstep. The battle that followed was unlike anything Elara had ever witnessed. Fire lit up the night sky, as Ashwood's forces clashed violently against Kale's defenders along the fortress walls. Elara, despite Kale's firm order to remain hidden in the safest part of the fortress, found herself unable to sit idle while people fought and suffered on her behalf. She grabbed a simple blade Kale had given her during their training sessions and made her way toward the chaos, determined to help however she could. The scene outside was overwhelming, smoke and shouting filling the air as guards struggled to hold back the relentless assault. Through the chaos, she spotted Kale fighting near the main gate, moving with terrifying precision against multiple attackers at once. Watching him now, she finally understood the truth behind the terrifying rumors that had followed him his entire life. He wasn't fighting out of cruelty or bloodlust. He was fighting to protect everyone he loved. A sudden movement to her left caught her attention just in time. An enemy soldier lunged toward her, and years of instinct kicked in as she remembered every lesson Kale had patiently taught her. She twisted away from the attack, using the soldier's own momentum against him, just as Kale had shown her, sending him stumbling to the ground. "Elara." Kale's voice cut through the chaos, panic clear in his tone as he fought his way toward her. "You need to get back inside." "I'm not leaving you," she shouted back, refusing to budge. Before he could argue further, a tall, imposing figure emerged from the smoke and chaos. Victor Ashwood himself, his eyes burning with cold, calculated hatred as he locked gazes with Kale. "You should have let the curse take you quietly," Ashwood snarled, drawing a wickedly curved blade. "Now I'll watch it destroy everything you love instead." Kale's expression turned murderous, stepping protectively in front of Elara. "You'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice deadly calm. The two men clashed violently, their fight a blur of speed and raw power that left Elara breathless with fear. Just as Ashwood managed to land a painful blow against Kale's side, sending him staggering backward, something inside Elara snapped. Without thinking, she rushed forward, positioning herself directly between the two men, her heart pounding with a fierce, protective determination she had never felt before. "Enough," she shouted. Ashwood paused, momentarily startled by her sudden interference. In that brief moment of hesitation, something extraordinary happened. A warm, golden light began pulsing from where Elara stood, growing brighter with every rapid heartbeat, wrapping protectively around both her and Kale. Ashwood stumbled backward, shielding his eyes from the intense light. "No," he whispered, disbelief and fear washing over his face. "The bond is already forming?" Kale, despite his injuries, pulled himself upright, staring at Elara with wide, astonished eyes. The golden light continued pulsing between them, growing stronger with every passing second, until it exploded outward in a powerful wave that sent Ashwood's remaining forces stumbling backward in confused retreat. When the light finally faded, Elara found herself standing safely in Kale's arms, both of them breathless and stunned by what had just occurred. Around them, the battlefield had grown eerily quiet, Ashwood's forces retreating in fearful disarray. "What just happened?" Elara whispered, still trying to process the overwhelming surge of power she had just witnessed. Kale stared down at her, awe and something far deeper shining behind his golden eyes. "I think," he said softly, "the bond just proved itself real." In the days following the battle, the fortress slowly began healing from the chaos of the attack. Ashwood's forces had retreated entirely, their confidence shattered by the display of power they had witnessed. Whispers spread quickly throughout the kingdom that the ancient curse threatening Kale's bloodline had finally been broken, the fated bond between the Alpha King and his chosen Omega proving stronger than generations of dark magic. Elara spent the following days recovering alongside Kale, both of them nursing injuries from the battle while quietly processing everything that had happened between them. The playful teasing and gentle tension that had defined their earlier interactions had transformed into something deeper, something steady and unshakable. One quiet afternoon, Ilara found Kale standing once again in the fortress garden, though this time his expression held none of the exhaustion or sadness she had witnessed there before. Instead, he looked peaceful, almost lighter, as if an enormous weight had finally lifted from his shoulders. "You look different," she said, walking over to join him. "I feel different," he admitted, a genuine smile touching his lips, one she had rarely seen from him before. "For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm just waiting for the next disaster to strike." Ilara smiled softly, reaching out to take his hand. "That's what happens," she said, "when you finally let someone else help carry the weight." Kale turned to face her fully, his golden eyes soft and open, in a way that made her heart swell with warmth. "I never planned on falling for the Omega I bought at that auction," he admitted quietly. "I never planned on falling for a terrifying Alpha King either," she teased gently. He laughed, a genuine warm sound that filled the quiet garden around them. "I suppose," he said, "the world doesn't always give us the plans we expect." "No," Ilara agreed softly. "Sometimes it gives us something better instead." Kale reached up, gently cupping her face in his hands, his expression turning serious once more. "Ilara," he said softly, "I know this began under circumstances neither of us chose. But I need you to know that whatever happens next, I don't want you here because of some ancient curse or bonding ritual. I want you here because I love you." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes as she smiled up at him, her heart finally settling into the peace she had been searching for since the moment she was taken from her old life. "I love you too," she whispered honestly. "Somewhere between fearing you and understanding you, I fell completely in love with the real man underneath all those terrifying rumors." Kale leaned down slowly, pressing a soft, gentle kiss to her forehead, sealing the quiet promise settling between them. Around them, the fortress that once felt like an intimidating prison now felt undeniably like home. Word of their bond spread quickly throughout the kingdom, transforming the terrifying reputation surrounding Kale Draven into something far softer in the eyes of his people. The Alpha King, once feared as a bloodthirsty monster, was now known throughout the land as a devoted protector, fiercely loyal to the woman who had broken the curse, threatening to destroy everything he loved. Months later, standing together on the same balcony where their bond had first begun to grow, Ilara looked out over the peaceful kingdom below, Kale's arms wrapped securely around her from behind. "Any regrets?" he murmured against her hair. Ilara smiled, leaning back contentedly against him. "Not a single one," she said softly. "I was sold at that auction, expecting the end of my old life. I never imagined I would find the beginning of something so much better instead." Kale pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head, holding her closer, as the sun set peacefully over the kingdom they now protected together. "Then let's make sure," he said softly, "that this new beginning lasts forever." And as the golden light of sunset spilled over the fortress that had once terrified her, Ilara finally understood that sometimes, the most terrifying beginnings led to the most beautiful endings of all.